Hello and welcome back, everyone. Happy New Year, but more importantly, Happy Wednesday. Today we are going to be going over Tinto Talks 44, which is a rather exciting one because it gives us a full list of every single tradable good or every single good that is going to be appearing in Europa Universalis 5, which everyone knows is the code name for Project Teaser. Project Teaser is the real name of the game. People are just referring to it as Europa Universalis 5. Now, a couple weeks ago, there was a little bit of controversy in that Johan wished us a happy Wednesday, but without a capitalized happy, which gave us a little bit of concern, cause for concern. We thought that it was possible that he was being held hostage. And we said, blink twice if you're being held hostage. He didn't blink in that next dev diary, and we ran it back and we said, hey, blink twice if you are still being held hostage. But we now know that Johan is safe and sound or they've learned how to impersonate him, because he has in fact started capitalizing Happy Wednesday again. And not only that, as kind of the developer on the lead of a very top secret game, he is now sending us coded messages. You see, not everything needs to be capitalized in this sentence. We know that happy needs to be capitalized here, but everyone and welcome, not necessary. So we know that he is sending us a message of, hello, everyone, welcome, Happy Wednesday. Okay, let's continue. Where we give you information about the future upcoming secret top game with the codename Project Caesar, codename Project Caesar, don't you mean codename Europa Universalis 5, whose real name is Project Teaser. Today we will go over all the trade goods we have in the game, and this is incredibly exciting, and is including some mechanics that I'm a huge fan of, including goods having different weights and different productions and this type of stuff. Goods that are raw materials may be extracted from RGO operations in locations that have them present, but many of them also have buildings that produce the good at a slightly less efficiency or capacity when you need access to it. So we're going to have some sort of base production of the good and some sort of supplementary production of the good, it appears to be. Now, I assume that this RGO operations will scale with some various things that you will do inside the province /state /location. Produced goods can only be produced by other various buildings. This makes sense. So if you get iron, which is the raw material, but then you produce something like swords or something like this with a building, because you do not mine swords from the earth unless you're really cool and your name is King Arthur. Some goods have base production, which is added to each market, scaled by total development of the market. Now, I'm not sure if this means that the market size scales the production. I think that this is kind of weird, and I think I'm kind of misunderstanding the sentence, if that's because that sounds like what it's saying, but that doesn't seem quite right. Some resources require more trade capacity than others to move a resource between markets. Super love this. Unless specified, the transport cost is 1. So obviously, if a good's really heavy, it's harder to move it around. Or if the value of a good... So, something that I've kind of skimmed through a lot of these, because we're just going to have a huge wall of resources, but something like gold, the gold is really heavy, but it might have a low transport cost in that the value of gold, and gold is a really scarce resource, the value of gold is really high, so per weight, it has really high value, so the value... it might have a low transportation cost because the actual quantity of gold you're moving in one unit of gold might be incredibly small. And so this might be something that still makes sense, but we will see something like horses. Horses, actually, I imagine, will have... Horses are a weird one because they actually should have a somewhat low transportation cost. If they're moving overland. Actually, that's not true. The horses eat a lot of hay and this type of stuff. It should probably be expensive, but we'll see in just a moment. But this is going to be something that I think is important because as per the simulation, because some goods were really easy to move from place to place, like spices, and other goods were definitely not. And so it would be nice to see this properly reflected in game. Default prices is the price goods would supply if the supply and demand are matching exactly. We're still kind of teasing apart some of the ideas regarding price. There's some contention on a video from a couple weeks ago that talked about price and market access and this type of stuff, where people are disagreeing about how price is getting calculated, this sort of thing, and it's a bit difficult to validate or verify anything without getting in game and like looking through tooltips and checking math and this type of thing. The price in each market depends on the supply and demand of the good. In the actual market, the price ranges depend on the age, where in tradition prices currently range from 50% to 200% of the default price, while in the Age of Revolutions they range from 20% to 500%. This is very interesting. So for those of you who don't know, Victoria 3, and I'm not sure what will cause the price range. In Victoria 3, if you have double the amount of sell orders than you have buy orders, it will be minus, or the price will be 25%. And if you have double the amount of buy orders than sell orders, it'll be 175%. Neither of these ranges are actually that close because Victoria 3's price floor is much lower than this 50%, and his price ceiling is also much lower than this 500%. But what you end up having is, so it's going to be a bit different than Victoria 3, but it's Victoria 3's mechanic is when it's double the buy orders than the sell orders. This might have a different range where it's not about having double the buy orders and sell orders, but instead it's you could have triple. Maybe it's double gives plus 200%, triple gives plus 300%, quadruple gives plus 400%. And then quintuple gives plus 500, demonstrating truly our knowledge of words, because quintuple is a word. And so it'll be interesting to see if this is an amount that scales with the ratio. So as you enter a new age, the same ratio gives you a different percentage, or if this is an amount that is going to be unlocking a new ratio that you could have. So maybe there's a cap at 200% if you have double the amount of buy orders, but then there's a new cap at 500%, but you need quintuple, if that makes sense. Not sure exactly how that's going to work. Goods are required by POPs, units, building inputs, construction, and more. My very favorite is more, mostly, etc. One important aspect is that you actually need the goods, and demand is higher than the supply. The buildings or POPs in the locations further away from the market center will not get the goods they require. So this is a bit divergent from Victoria 3, where you just consume fake goods. In this, then the market access becomes more pivotally important, and they will not get the resources they require. I think it's not quite the case that you just get zero. I think it's the case that the people with low market access start proportionate to that market access fulfilling orders. I'm not sure exactly how it works though, but this means that getting market access in a bunch of places is going to be critically important for keeping all the economic activity humming, and it's also going to make market centers really, really powerful to have, and going to make you want to have your own market center. But at the same time, if you have your own market center and you don't have a lot of trade sort of activity or capacity or this type of stuff, then you can't get the goods anyways, in either case. So it might be the case that piggybacking on a market is going to be really good if you can just build enough infrastructure to get high market access, even if you aren't in the middle of the market. Something like this, because you let them trade, for the goods, as we saw kind of in the Scandinavia video with Norway. Maybe it makes sense for Norway to want to be in Lubeck's market because Lubeck's going to have a lot of trade, and so as long as they can increase the market access, they will have access to the goods they want. Without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so the default price of horses is 3, and the transport cost is 2. So the transport cost is double the normal cost, which I think makes some sense, given the fact that you need to feed the horses as you're transporting them. They were domesticated at an unknown point of the Eurasian steppe around 6,000 years ago. Since then, they have been used by people for a wide variety of tasks. Most importantly, has been waging war. Man. Okay. I mean, like, they also got used as, like, beasts of burden and various other... Yeah, okay, whatever. In that sense, the Middle Ages were the golden age of cavalry, as it was closely linked to the development of feudal societies. Okay, that seems fair enough. Here we have clay. Default price is 0.25, not that expensive, and has a base production of 0.02, which is, I assume, low? This seems low, right? But okay, clay is the type of soil that has been used by humanity for the production of pottery and ceramics since prehistoric times. Another main use is construction in combination with materials, or the creation of bricks. Clay tablets were used as one of the first writing methods, or was also one of the first writing methods invented, so its impact on the development of the loud car outside is, of course, undeniable. Now, maybe clay just scales really hard, and so it has a really low kind of base rate, and then is scaling by a means that is, I mean, it's like only 2% of horses, right? But maybe it scales with population way harder or this type of stuff. Or maybe it's the case that horses kind of develop, the RGO naturally, and then clay, you really need the supplementary buildings to actually get any clay or much use out of clay or to produce clay in your market, this type of thing. We have sand. It has a base production that is even half of clay and a quite low price. It's one of the most common materials on Earth and is used in multiple varied. It has been the most pervasive abrading material used to shape any kind of stone or metal due to it being coarse and rough, as a component in many building materials, as the main material for the production of glass, among many other uses. Do they use sand as ballast? I forget what material gets used as ballast exactly. I think it's probably a combination of sand and other stuff. Stone, default price is 1. So we see stone is more expensive than either of these other two kind of earth materials here. And a transport cost of 5 and a base production of 0.01. Again, we see this really low base production. Kind of curious about how that's going to shake out. But the transport cost of 5 means you're not moving them rocks around. You definitely want to have stone inside of your market, which is a little bit of an interesting thing, because if you don't have stone inside of your market, maybe it's the case that you just like categorically kind of have to avoid certain types of buildings or build paths or this type of thing. And maybe it becomes a little bit of a mini game to ensure that stone's in your market. I assume that stone is abundant enough that this really isn't a problem, but okay. It's been one of the main building materials of humanity throughout all of history, stronger and more durable than other options like clay or wood. It was the go-to material for any construction that was built to last, like forts. Building from long ago, like the pyramids, have reached our times still standing due to the durability of the stone that we're made of. So, you know, it's a bit of an interesting thing as well. If you start a building and it demands like 100 stone and you have 20 stone in your market, and let's say the ticks are per week, they might be per month, not really sure, then maybe it's the case that you're going to look at it like this, in the sense that, okay, now we're going to have 5 weeks that get spent having buy orders until the buy orders for the entirety of the building that we have decided to construct are filled, after which point, you know, we no longer really consume that much stone. And so maybe it's just going to act more as a throttle for how much construction you can do, rather than necessarily like an on-off switch, in the sense that if you'll have just a bunch of buildings that are kind of waiting to get the stone that they need, if you have a low stone supply in your market, and then eventually you just stop adding buildings to production, and it instead of like being like, oh, we can't build the buildings, it's like acting more like a throttle. And so this will make maybe the places that are more abundant in stone, like thinking like Europe, versus a place like the Middle East, which I assume has less stone, although I don't really know. Maybe it's the case that you can like build more forts, and then this makes it so maybe you can rely more on an infantry army rather than a cavalry army, because you can use forts strategically or tactically, and this type of thing. A bit interesting. But the base cost of... It's interesting to think about some of the emergent play patterns that can result of the different transportation cost of goods and this type of thing, when we have like these markets. Okay, so coal, default price is 2, transport cost of 2. Coal seems a little bit more valuable. It's had a long history as a source of fuel. Give me the peat, boys, and yeah. But it's not until the invention and the dissemination of practical steam engine that demand would really take off. Something about wanting to get lost in your mossy knoll. Lots of peat. It burns. All right. These are references no one's going to get. As the Industrial Revolution swept across Europe, the use and export or import of coal would become a major business and integral part of the modern economy. So I'm not sure. I think that, I mean, in theory, like the back 50 years of the game, coal's going to be important. And so that's maybe a little bit interesting to think about. Because the game, I think, goes up to 1837, so I can't remember if it's been confirmed to go 500 years. But if it does go 500 years, it kind of bumps up right with Victoria 3. Coal is important for the production of steel, the industrialization process, and so yeah, we'll see how things shake out. For iron, we have the default price is 3, and the transport cost is 2. Notably, quite a bit more dear than the other, like, kind of stone-type resources, or sand, or clay, is iron. And this is a resource that we have focused on quite a bit when we were doing Tinto maps. We have since stopped doing Tinto maps, but this seems to be something that's probably critically important resource to have for waging war in the war engine, and the fact that it has a higher transportation cost does make it so that it's probably going to be important to have it at home. Represents not just iron but other ferrous materials in the production of alloys such as steel. Iron formed the basis of metallurgical industry and was extensively, not extremely but also extremely, was used extensively in the production of weapons and other military equipment. And so this is kind of the big thing that comes to mind. If you have a market, and the strategy is evolving emergently from differences you have in, like, markets, is just something that's very neat to me. But it could be the case that if you have a lot of iron, you can build a more warfare-oriented kind of country. And if you don't have a lot of iron, then maybe you actually just be like, okay, we got to do more diplomacy, we got to do more trading, we got to be focused and oriented in other ways that are not warfare. Or you just have to have archers and cavalry instead of, mass infantry, which I assume consume more iron. We see copper. Default price 3, transport cost of 2, same as iron. Main component of bronze and was essential in the early production of cannons. Shout out to cannons. And which is interesting. I wonder if the transition to kind of the cannon period is going to make it so that there's a shifting imbalance in terms of what's important. That would make sense. Here we have gold. The default price is 10, but production impacts inflation. Interesting. And here we also have the implied transport cost is 1, which makes a lot of sense because the overall value of 10 can be done with less weighted material. So even though gold is, I'm pretty sure, heavier than copper, per square inch, the individual unit of gold is less than a square inch, or less than the cubic amount that is going to be used for a unit of copper. But it was the basis of many formal currencies in Europe. The great gold mines of Central and South America would end the great bullion crisis that had gripped Europe in the previous century. However, unwise usage of great wealth could lead to inflation and ruin. Shout out to Spain. So next up we have silver. We have kind of basically the same as gold, but slightly less valuable. It was one of the first materials used as money, and most successfully along with gold. Central Europe became the center of production of silver during the Middle Ages, although Columbian exchange shifted the focus of the world production to the Americas, making it the main production center of the newborn global currency since the 16th century. It makes sense. We have tin. Default price is 2, and assumed transportation price is 1. Interesting that it is less than copper, but I suppose tin is lighter. It was used extensively for the first time in metallurgy as a part of the alloy to obtain bronze 5,000 years ago. Later, it has been widely used to coat other materials and alloys such as iron, lead, or steel to prevent corrosion, as well as to make pewter, a very common in tableware. We do like the pewter tableware more than the lead tableware. Which brings us to lead. Lead has been obtained since ancient times as a byproduct of silver extraction by burning galena, much like the loud cars burning that oil. Lead was used in a wide range of household and manufactured products, especially by the Romans, whose levels of lead production were not reached until the Industrial Revolution. In modern age, it became the main material for making bullets for firearms. I suppose that makes sense. If you have a bunch of lead lying around, and that's something that it could be pretty productively used for. It's heavy, and then it kind of is a little bit messy. I guess I haven't handled too much lead, though, so, which is probably a good thing. Shout out to the Mad Hatter. Next up, we have silk. Default price is 4. Interesting that silk does not have a lower production price, so we have to assume that a lot more, or transportation costs, so we assume that a lot more silk is getting transported. The price is relatively high. The finest of all fabrics of the East was the silk produced in China and East Asia, while the less iconic than spices, the profits from silk and finely woven cloth would in fact soon dwarf those of the spice trade from the European East India companies due to increasing demands. Attempts were also made to produce the material locally in the mercantilist Europe with varying degrees of success. Yeah, you do hear about the silk smuggling that took place where a silkworm was smuggled in a cane out of China. Here we have lower transportation costs on dyes and a high default price. For as long as textiles have been woven, there have been a market for dyes. We actually have a book on textiles entirely called The Fabric of Civilization, which has been interesting, and some of the dyes have been really expensive over the course of time, and others not so expensive. It really depends on the color. In particular, purple was very, very expensive. It was produced using, like, I forget the like crustacean or mollusk or clam or whatever it was in the Mediterranean that was used to produce the purple, which is the color of royalty. But that color, in particular, the production of it, smelled really, really bad. And the smell could not be washed out of the clothing. So the people who wore the royal purple had the absolute stankiest clothes, which is really interesting. But they still wore the purple because purple was like the most expensive and difficult color to produce. And so they wore this stanky-ass clothing. But let's continue. For as long as textiles have been woven, there's been a market for dyes. During the late Middle Ages, expensive dyes such as indigo, there we go, indigo, would be worth a fortune due to how distant the source in India was. Well, you could produce purple in the Mediterranean, and this is something that was done. As the world opened up, dyes became easier to get hold of, both the possibilities to produce them in America and the greater accessibility of the Indian market. Nonetheless, dyes remained rare until the early 19th century as the dye plantation in India fell into European hands. A veritable gold rush ensued. But yeah, textiles have been, like, if you think about it, people wear clothes and have been wearing clothes for a very long time, and the very basis for that is textiles. Often textiles would be used interchangeably as a medium of exchange, where bolts of fabric would be used to exchange rather than something like a currency. In fact, like if you've ever read Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is a piece of Chinese literature, they talk about, paying people in bolts of cloth or bolts of fabric and this type of stuff. But kind of generally underappreciated in games how important fabric was as a mercantile good. I think largely because we have reached a point in civilization where we think of clothing and fabric and this type of stuff as not being central or critical when it was important. But too much tangent there. Here we have incense. Default price is 2.5. Transport cost is half. To spread smoke and fragrance through the burning of materials has been common in ceremonial practices for centuries. Frankincense, agarwood, sandalwood, myrrh, and other goods for this can be found in places, and their diffusion was an integral part of the formation of trade networks such as the Silk Road or the fittingly named incense route. Yep, that is fittingly named. We have tea. Default price is 3. If it's tea, it's for 3. Tea was an important luxury drink in China, India, and Southeast Asia. Was often used in religious and social rituals. The English popularized tea in Europe. I'd never considered as notable a drink as coffee. Wow, shit. Throwing the shade, bang, bang. It still produced a large profit merely from the fact that the world supply was low. Shout out to the Englishmen watching this video. Cocoa, default price is 4, was used as a stimulant by the Aztec, Incan, and Indian rulers since early medieval times. It was popularized in Europe in the 16th century, with Spaniards imported it from the American colonies. It became a luxury enjoyed by the rich. That makes sense. It's still a luxury enjoyed by the rich, you know what I mean? A little bit of booger sugar. But next up is coffee. Default price is 3. Coffee was first discovered in the northeast region of Ethiopia, and coffee cultivation first took place in southern Arabia. From the Middle East, coffee spread to Italy in the 17th century, whereas then introduced to the rest of Europe. Coffee became most widely accepted after it was deemed a Christian beverage by Pope Clement VIII in 1600, despite appeals to ban the, quote, Muslim drink. Yep, okay. Fiber crops, default price is 2. Do we think that the price on these should be 2? I'm not sure. And many of the different fibrous crops were used all around the world to create a multitude of products such as sails, ropes, fishing nets, dyes, and clothes. Fishing nets and clothes, sorry, not dyes. Beyond their use to produce coarse textiles, however, many were also used a core part of the production of finer textiles used in ceremonies, households, and elsewhere. Some examples are hemp, flax, jute, and sisal. Do they have rope in here? I guess, yeah, they do have rope in here. That's what I think of when I think of fibrous crops is, the production of rope, which of course would be very important in the production of something like a ship. The transport price isn't high though, which I think is going to be one of the things that perhaps. So you're going to have like your economic activity at home, where you're going to prefer to produce stuff that have high prices, all other things equal, which they probably won't be, and then in terms of your specialization and trade strategy, you're going to trade around stuff having low transportation price, but maybe having low transportation price is also going to be something that's important from the production lens if you are very trading oriented and you are trying to mass export stuff. But I don't think I remember fiber crops being present in England, so like we think about them building a really big navy, which of course requires, sails, ropes, and not fishing nets, but you know what I mean. This seems like a good that's more important for Navy specifically. But if you have a really big maritime kind of thing going on, you could probably trade fairly effectively, and there's no high trade cost, this type of thing. We see ivory, default price is 4. Ivory was one of the main exports of Africa apart from slaves. It was highly sought after by Europeans for use in various manufactured goods, such as cutlery, gifts, small pieces of arts, furniture, etc. Mostly, and of course our favorite, etc. Fur, default price is 2. Also used as clothing in addition to textiles. They were one of the basic elements of high quality and warm clothing. Skins from all kinds of animals were supplied initially from Russia, but more and more from North America, whose beavers would be the prize choice of at least until the late middle 18th century. Shout out to beavers everywhere. Too bad you guys got hunted. And too bad you're also a bit of a nuisance when it comes to making dams. Yeah. We're talking about flooding places. Flooded. Next up is lumber, which again we see the base production kind of be a bit interesting, where the raw materials are operating kind of a little bit on a different sort of axis than a lot of these other materials. We have the really, really low number, so I assume it scales up very, very quickly. Default price is 1. Lumber has been one of the main building materials for humanity throughout all of history. Although less durable than stone, it's more easily acceptable, have made it a staple of any building in all places of the world. Even structures designed to be resilient, like castles and fortifications, have also been made out of wood rather than stone. Notably, stone does not have that expensive shipping price, right? That we had seen out of we see transport cost here of 5. Wood rather does not have any expensive transport cost, which might make it the preferable resource if you don't have wood or stone. It's maybe the case that you would prefer to import wood or build more wood fortifications. Sacrificing that durability as a bit of a concession to the fact that it's cheaper to transport. Something like this. We see salt. Now, salt's another good that's like critical in the development of humanity because it really allowed for the movement of. Allows for the preservation of goods, which in turn kind of allows for movement away from the coast by various human civilizations. Salt is essential for human life. In addition, it was one of the most common means to preserve food for long winter months. It was either mineral or brought from mines in Central Europe, or natural from salt wetlands production via evaporation along sunny coastlines. So it was very important for the development of humanity, although that was kind of like, its importance was like a little bit more outside the scope of the game. We have medicaments with default price of 1 and transport cost of 0.5. A wide variety of plants and animals products have been used throughout history to treat all kinds of illnesses due to their medicinal properties or superstition thereof. To be fair, superstition gets a bad rap. You know what really works? The placebo effect. So if you think something's going to work, even if it doesn't work, then it still works, which most people don't realize, or they kind of like under account for. I've had conversations with my friends where like, they're like, what is it? Acupuncture doesn't work. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Acupuncture is so effective. In fact, it's so effective, it's just as effective as a placebo. And specifically in pain reduction, which, the ears be hurting because of the loud car outside, specifically with pain reduction, placebos are so incredibly powerful that, anything that's like not actually effective in terms of being more effective than a placebo, it still doesn't really matter. It's it's going to be effective because specifically for pain reduction as an intervention, as long as you think it's going to work. So if you want to keep getting acupuncture, and it's working for you, then don't listen to the haters with their double-blind studies, because if it works, it works. Yeah. I'm not saying that acupuncture works. I'm saying that it's a placebo, and placebos work. Some were more based on actual properties than others, while in some cases it was more about a belief in their effectiveness. There we go. Okay. We have gems. Interesting. Default price is 4. Transport cost is 0.5. So gems might be a good that is going to be good for exporting because the price is low, and also I think that gems are not particularly common, if I recall correctly, on the map, and so since the earliest times, stones such as rubies, sapphires, diamonds, emeralds, jades, or pearls have been used in jewelry and ceremonial attire. For centuries, the only source of diamonds in the world was the fabled mines at Golconda. While not all precious stones are rare, they are all highly sought after commodities. Well, I don't know how I feel about pearls being here and here. I suppose it's just a description, and it has been used in jewelry, but produced inside different kinds of shelled mollusks. I think mollusks are also the things you crush up to get the purple dye. The resulting product is a hard, glistening object, ideally round, but can take many shapes. They have been appreciated for their beauty and used like gemstones and as ornaments all throughout a world, or all over the world throughout. Oh my God, I can't read. All over the world through all human history. Okay. Makes sense. We see kind of this profile where it's got, a lot of these goods that seem like kind of valuable trade goods. We're seeing that this default price 4 and no transportation cost is kind of a little bit common. We see it in cocoa, and so it's kind of a little bit of a staple. Amber is a valuable good made from fossilized resin, primarily used in the manufacture of jewelry and ornaments. Its main source has been deposits on the Prussian coast, mentioned for the first time in the 12th century document. Okay. We have saltpeter, which of course is used for gunpowder. It's going to be critically important once you kind of reach that era. And doesn't have a really high transportation cost, and so moving around to make gunpowder is going to be important. Varied uses such as fertilizer or salt for meat processing. However, the invention of gunpowder and firearms during the Middle Ages really raised its importance as one of the main components of it, together with charcoal and sulfur. Mined in great quantities around the world, this metal will go on to acquire an infamous reputation. Shout out to Nobel. I think his first name's Alfred, who of course is best known not for his, prize ceremony or this type of thing, that nonsense, but for the creation of dynamite. Dr. Nobel invented dynamite. Okay, we have a loom for aluminum, right? Surprised to not see this a little bit lighter, maybe? Maybe that's okay. An essential ingredient in the dye-making process... Oh, wait, it's a different type of aluminum. Different in the die making process, as well as specializing in the tanning process. Seeing use in a variety of artistic and craft contexts, it primarily utilized the painting and illuminating process. Originally mostly from Chad region, AU, it was traded in markets of the entire Islamic world, but the late Middle Ages, other sources started to be exploited in Europe. We see spices, which spices are going to be the nicest. This really stands out as something that you would want to trade. Almost stands out as much as that, kind of siren that we get, the wee-woos outside, hope you make it, where this is really, really low transportation cost, cross-section with really high default price. So this would be controlling spice is going to be valuable, but also acting as a middleman for spice, pulling spice into your market so that you can arbitrage it and trade it to another market when it has a low transportation cost is also something that seems relatively attractive. And so, a little bit of spice trade going on. Spices have been known in Europe since ancient times, mostly for their medicinal value and for their ability to improve the taste of food. Pepper, ginger, nutmegs, chili, cinnamon, etc. came partly from East Africa, but mostly from India, China, and the Spice Islands, currently Indonesia, to be traded in Alexandria or the other terminals of the Great Caravan Roads. The European desire for cheaper and more direct supply constituted the main motivation for the eastbound sea voyages of discovery for Portugal. Makes sense. If you control the spice, it's pretty nice. We have wine. Default prices too. I think the amount of places you can... Oh, well, actually, no, you have to be able to produce grapes. Okay. Produce time immemorial in southern parts of Europe. It is still constituted an essential element of the everyday diet, except for maybe in the Muslim world. I always mix up haram and halal, but I'm pretty sure that's haram. Wine is not considered a luxury product, but probably serves as a welcome relief for hundreds to an otherwise dull diet. Well, that's what the spices are for, man. Those are luxury. Elephants. Finally, we can recreate, the great Carthaginian general Hannibal's army. And by army, I mean only like one elephant really made it alive over the Alps, and he largely used it for propaganda reasons rather than actual battle. And so he rode around on that elephant. It's like the only one that made it over the Alps. But he made it over the Alps with elephants. Elephants have been used in warfare since ancient times in India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Shout out to Carthage. Their use of elephantry, that sounds so much cooler than infantry, persisted in some of these regions into the Middle Ages, although the advent of gunpowder warfare in the modern age outpaced its usefulness in battle. Definitely makes sense. Also, a very expensive kind of animal to keep, in terms of food consumption, right? Default price is 10 though, so I think this is tied with gold for the most expensive good we've seen. We see marble default price of 5, which is quite high, but not expensive to transport, so this will be interesting and useful for, the production of churches and sculptures since antiquity, being considered a type of luxurious material due to appearance and ductility. Some of the best works of arts of the Renaissance and Baroque artists, such as Michelangelo, Bernini, are made of marble. Here we see mercury. Default price is 3. Love to see it in liquid form, which it of course is at room temperature. It was used for medicine, but will also be of great importance to refine gold and silver ores of lesser qualities in order to make them profitable. Interesting. Didn't know about that use, but okay. I feel like transport should be difficult for mercury, but I don't even know what mercury mining looks like. You just discover a puddle and then it's not water. I've never even thought about extracting mercury from the earth and storing it and how that process would go. Interesting. Okay, we have cotton. Default price is 3. Kind of the 3 to 4 cost profile we're seeing for a lot of these, what in my mind just seems more like trade-oriented goods. Originated in Central Asia, but was mostly widely used in Europe until it was introduced in the American colonies, and used as a cheap but good complement or substitute for wool in the clothing industry in the late 18th century. I think England had a really big wool industry, and then that was a big source of protectionism in the 1700s. Trying to protect the local industry. That was one of the things that Adam Smith talked about a lot in The Wealth of Nations, is the local wool industry and how protectionism is bad and free trade is good. We have sugar. Default price is 3. Not only used as a sweetener, but also for food preservation. The sugarcane was the only known means of obtaining sugar at this time, and has been grown initially in the Mediterranean islands. Interesting. But the labor-intensive system plantation in America, especially in the Caribbean islands, which soon moved the major production sources overseas. In my mind, it was like... I'd never really thought of the origin of sugar too extensively, but... when I was a business major in college, I did several presentations and things on sugarcane-based ethanol. So in my head, it's native origin is in South America, because that's where it really gets abundantly produced and is much more efficient as a source of ethanol, at least with the technology, back when I researched it, at the technology of that time, much more efficient than corn-based ethanol. And corn-based ethanol is kind of stupid, considering how much better sugarcane-based ethanol is. And it was just kind of insipid protectionism on the U.S.'s part to really be forcing corn-based ethanol, in my opinion, when sugarcane-based ethanol was so much more efficient. But anyway, that's another tangent. Tobacco, base price 3. Base transportation cost, kind of what we've seen. Unknown in Europe until brought from the Americas in the late 16th century, it quickly became fashion for the upper classes who could afford it, and ensured fast and profitable economic growth of the British colonies in North America, as well as Portuguese Brazil. Next up, we have food. Okay, we have wool. Or wait, no, this is... Okay, it's a combination. Food, which includes wool. Default price is 2.5 and produces 5 food per unit produced. Interesting. So we have somewhat of a mixed good, which means that if we're producing a lot of food in this way, we will have a lot of... for those of you who've ever played Satisfactory, when you produce some goods, sometimes you have a waste good produced alongside it. And so what'll be really interesting is if you're producing food primarily through wool, right? And you need a certain amount of food, then this can lead to you having a glut of wool because you overproduce it super, super hard, which then could give you maybe some sort of advantage as far as trade goes, which is a little bit of an interesting play pattern. Anytime there's a dual track good and you're overproducing one, it incentivizes you to trade that, even in Victoria 3, and so this creating a certain sort of play pattern where if you are generating food primarily through these means that have secondary outputs, then this will increase the value of pursuing trade in your country. And so if you're not producing food with secondary kind of outlets, then maybe trade gets worse, and maybe there's a nice, easy, even balance breakpoint where depending on where you're getting your food, this will influence whether or not you want to go trade oriented in the early game, this type of thing. And so it's interesting to think about and how these goods can inform emergent play patterns. I mean, we'll see how this works, but okay. Came mostly out of sheep that grazed in the more marginal lands, not suitable to other forms of agriculture. Shout out to the highlands. Prior to the use of cotton, it was the major raw material for clothing. So it'll be interesting to see this. Here we have wild game. Default price is 1 and produces 2.5 food per unit produced. Okay. Wild game is a source of food and nutrition for local populations, especially in sparsely populated rural communities. The hunt of wild animals such as elk, deer, boars, etc. are a more important cornerstone of society due to the fact that aforementioned animals contribute leather, bone, entrails, and nutrition to the populace. So leather, bones, and entrails are what we are getting with the wild game, and then the food is the we're getting the dual track product. All right, here we have fish, and maybe we're misunderstanding this, but I'm assuming that leather, these things are part of wild game. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this. Maybe this requires refineries, where we can refine wild game. Like, wild game is good, and then we can refine it into leather, and then when wild game is produced, it also produces the food. But something like fish might not have the same refining path as, like, wool or wild game. But it was one of the most basic foods for the European population in this age. Meat was more of a luxury for the great majority. One of the more basic, and then... this is phrased in such a way that fish is not meat, but, like... I mean, this is just, like, a linguistic thing. I consider fish meat. But, like, maybe that's just, like, the macronutrient profile of it, like, is just basically it's meat, but... Okay, that's just a weird thing to get hung up on. I think fish constitutes meat, but I understand that some people don't think that. Fishermen also provided the basic recruiting pool of the merchant and military navies of most nations. This secondary thing is a little bit interesting because I wonder if it'll provide particular advantages. Like, large fish production provides advantages to recruitment in these areas. That'll be interesting. And we have wheat. Now we see that the default price is 1 and produces 8 food per unit produced, which is considerably higher than these other ones, right? But the default price is quite low. There's this essay that I often refer to that's pretty interesting. I won't give the full explanation, but it makes the argument that it's the type of agrarian society that largely informs culture, and wheat-based societies, aka Western societies, tend to be more individualistic because the production of wheat as an endeavor requires less communal and group effort than the production of something, say, rice, which tends to produce more communally oriented societies because the irrigation required for rice was much more of a communal and group effort, in order to get things running that you would need to run. Entire communities would need to operate together in order to make rice farming, particularly terrace rice farming, an effective endeavor. But wheat represents the vegetable foodstuff that was a staple diet of human and animals. A lack of it would always lead to revolts and riots. Other cereals and vegetable foodstuffs would later be augmented by tomatoes, corn, and even potatoes from America, offering a wider choice of both food and agricultural production varieties. I wonder if this is also a split good. I'm not really sure if this is a split good or if it's just the food that's getting produced. I wonder what would consume wheat that would not be considered food, because we're seeing with the fish and the wheat, these are maybe, like, with the wild game and the wool, we're thinking that there's a secondary byproduct, but less so with the fish and the wheat. But okay, soybeans, default price is 1, produces 6 food per unit produced. It's a type of legume that has been a staple crop in the East Asia for 10,000 years. They are quite versatile, and as they not only be eaten themselves, but milk can also be extracted from them, which can also be further processed into tofu. Soybeans can also be fermented into products such as soy sauce and miso. We do like ourselves some soy sauce. And so, yeah, you know what the most interesting legume is, or thing that people don't realize is a legume? Maybe it's not interesting, but peanuts. They are not a nut. They are a legume. Yep. We see maize. Default price is 1, produces 8 food per unit produced. I wonder how that lines up. The same as wheat. cultivated plant that was originally domesticated in Mexico thousands of years ago. Maize was traded between the New World and the Old World with the arrival of Europeans in the 15th century. Due to its enduring nature as well as higher dietary value, maize was destined to become a worldwide commodity. And here we see it. The differentiation between the grains is wrought out. So I think like per hectare and per like person, I think you could feed more people with rice if I'm not mistaken. And we do see, I could be mistaken. It's been a while since I researched this type of thing. I know a lot of people in Victoria 3, or not a lot of people, but the people who are grain nerds, which I suppose is actually like, there's actually probably just 2 people on the Discord/forums. Shout out to you. But I've seen a lot of graphs and such where they they argue like on a per labor basis or a hectare basis. There's actually like differences in terms of production of grain, and that it's silly that Victoria 3 makes them all equal, and every version of producing grain equal. In particular, rice was interesting because if you put more effort into the production of wheat, you very quickly reach like a ceiling at which you can produce more. But rice is very responsive to additional effort, so you can just keep working harder. And I've seen people make the argument that this is a reason why culturally Asians tend to be more hardworking, is because, you know, they have this legacy of grain being more of the grain or food stuff that most of their people like worked throughout history, being more responsive to additional effort relative to wheat, which is kind of an interesting thing, but I haven't seen a more comprehensive study on that like I've seen on the individualistic versus communal. But the point is that like on a per hectare basis or a per person basis, my understanding is that rice is just generally more efficient, and we do see it end up being more efficient. I think it's probably, if I recall correctly, more efficient than wheat, but I mean, they maybe just don't want the game to feel so unbalanced towards like you being like, oh, you know, you just like have to get this rice. The rice is nice. Shout out to rice, rar. Technically, rice in Victoria 3 is incredibly strong, but that's just because it has less construction cost. Or it employs twice as many people, so it's a bit of a weird abstraction. Anyways, it's a type of grain that has been the staple of food in Asia since domestication more than 10,000 years ago. It was also independently domesticated in Africa more than 3,000 years ago and has been an important food source there ever since. It was brought to Europe through trade with Asia as far back as classical antiquity, although it did not manage to supersede other types of grain there. In particular, you need a really wet environment for the growth of rice, as far as I can remember. So Europe might not have been an appropriate environment for it, like relative to some place like maybe South America would be better for growing rice, this type of thing. Okay, we have sturdy grains. Default price is 1, produce 5 food. Sturdy grains is a different kind of cereal grasses that have been domesticated in many parts of the world at different points in time ever since the Neolithic. The Neolithic? Does that not require an era? We can just refer to Neolithic like that? Okay. I'm not the expert. Their greater resistance to poor quality soils and dry conditions have made them an important food source in semi-arid regions compared to other types of grain. So we're seeing like the sturdy grains representing a variety of grains that are less efficient, but we see that relative to rice, sturdy grains are half as effective at producing food. And so we can anticipate that it will be harder to produce or support really large populations in sturdy grain-oriented areas relative to rice-oriented areas. Kind of interesting, and this also should be the case. And so very cool to see it, rather than, you know, I don't know if the numbers are correct, but rather than like Victoria 3, where like every type of food production is roughly equivalent with some minor tweaks, when historically or actuality, the amount of people you can support with different grains in terms of either effort or hectare is variable. We see legumes. This is peanuts. Default price is 1 and produce 5 units of food produced. Okay, various civilizations across history have used legumes as a substantial source of nutrition for thousands of years. Much of like maize, Europeans were introduced to new types of them with their eventual arrival of the shores of the New World. Legumes were not only filling, but cheap to produce and move on ships. A lot of people argue which is better, between chickpeas and garbanzo beans, and I personally think the argument's silly, but let's continue. Potato, default price is 1 and produces 8 units of food, so the same as, we had seen wheat as well as maize. But it is a separate good. The potato is a starchy tuber. That's right. It is a tuber. Domesticated around a lake Titicaca by the native people of the Andes. It helped to the rise of the Andean civilizations thanks to the hardiness and high caloric density. After the Columbian Exchange, it spread all across the globe by 1750 and was a staple food in Europe, facilitating 19th century population boom, except in Ireland. There wasn't enough of it to go around. Actually, the thing was, Ireland had to export its non-potato grains or non-potato food stuff, if I recall correctly. They could only eat potatoes, and so this was actually the source of, the massive starvation was because they had to export the other stuff and they could only eat the potatoes, and the potato crop went particularly bad. They were simultaneously exporting food and starving to death, which, definitely it feels bad, man. Here we have livestock. Default price is 1.5 and produces 8 food per unit produced. Since the dawn of history... I actually really hate this clause a lot in terms of writing. Since the dawn of time, it's like... I suppose dawn of history I prefer to dawn of time, because time never had a dawn, this type of stuff. But, okay. It's just, we're not going to get into some sort of pedantic and ultimately irrelevant discussion of, the English language, but you can just cut this out and have the care for domesticated animals has been one of the main occupations of humanity. Livestock includes everything from cows and horses to rich agricultural areas to the herds of pastoralists in the Great Plains and deserts of the world. And so we do have livestock, which is got a higher default price than all these grains, and it has a similar food produced to, the wheat, which is a little bit of a thing. I wonder if it requires grains to produce this, though. And that, will it consume the food that's produced by the grain, or will it consume the grain itself? It's a little bit unclear to me, exactly what what the 8 food units per unit produced exactly means. Whether it's getting consumed or it's a split good or this type of thing. Olives. Shout out to one of my favorite fruit. Default price is 1 and produce 4 food per unit produced. They are harvested by the trees of the same name, which has been cultivated around the Mediterranean for thousands of years. They are highly appreciated in gastronomy, especially the olive oil that's used to cook and dress a wide range of foods in the Mediterranean cuisine. Yeah, delicious. Dates. I wish I could have one. The default price is 1 and produces 4 units per unit produced. Dates are a type of fruit harvested from date palm trees, which grow in semi-arid but fertile terrain regions throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Dates are widely used in different types of cuisines. Makes sense. We have fruit. Why are olives not included with fruit? Who knows? They are a fruit. Interestingly, tomato has 3 different classifications, and it's a fruit sometimes and it's a vegetable other times. In terms of gastronomy, culinarily, it's considered a vegetable. Botanically, a tomato is a fruit, and then legally, at least in the United States, it's a vegetable. But anyways, fruits cover a wide range of products found on trees such as citrus, bitter and sweet oranges, apples, and more. For many, these products would be unattainable, and as a source of nutrition only for elites. Nearly every region across the world is home to a different kind of fruit, and the advent of global trade would go on to introduce different populations to various new fruits. Now, that is all of our natural goods, and we have produced goods. So we have tar. Originally propped up as a cash crop, tar is a valuable ingredient in the shipbuilding process. Its appearance, that of a thick black liquid, is due to the aggressive distillation process that is required for its production. Tar is widely used as a seal for ship's hulls and a cheap way to waterproof sails. Also, I do believe I remember seeing tar as a input good or for like the operation of castles. Or maybe it was the construction of castles, but like using it to like tar your enemies down below would be a thing. Porcelain, default price is 3 and the transport cost is 0.5. Again, whenever we see kind of the lower transport cost, it is an interesting one from the perspective of we can trade and move this more effectively, especially across multiple nodes. But we do see porcelain with transportation cost 0.5. I assume this is because we don't need to trade a lot of it in order to get value. It's a type of ceramics characterized by strength and translucence due to the vitrification of the materials caused by high temperatures. It was developed in China over a period of time, starting more than 3,000 years ago, with proper porcelain being developed already almost 2,000 years ago, and from there, it eventually spread all over the world, and it's a highly sought-after commodity. We see naval supplies, fan favorite. Naval supplies represent everything needed in ship construction, from basic wood to tar, ropes, linen, sails, and various other materials. So we will see a whole lot of different materials go into the production of naval supplies, which is an abstraction of all these things. The Baltics was initially a main supplier until North America became an alternate supply source in the early 18th century. Colonial expansion into America, in part, to secure supplies of such vital goods. Okay. We see firearms, default price is 3. Conception and arrival of guns changed the dynamic of battlefields. Wars waged across Asia and Europe will now be subject to cultivating, importing, and harnessing the potency of gunpowder. Guns have become a natural evolution of warfare and an essential element, an essential part of protecting sovereignty of domains across the earth. I don't know why my brain just like auto like substitutes sometimes. Like, part is not the word element, but my brain just like, it's like, you know what, these two are synonymous, who cares? And then I just say element of protect. Element even takes more syllables to say. It like actually makes no sense, but yeah. We see cannons with a slightly more expensive transport cost here. Although the siege weapons have existed since antiquity, the discovery of gunpowder has given rise to some weapons with potentially destructive power that has never been seen before. The ability to throw bigger projectiles, we throw big, at greater speed and distances than ever before will make it, all but the sturdiest of fortifications quickly fall before them. Without mentioning the effect of those projectiles can have when fired towards armies themselves. Yeah, it's super interesting that, like, you know, it's not the cannonball that kills you, it's the sending dirt and rocks up into the air, and, like, they're basically just shrapnel that, like, gets you. I mean, the cannonball hitting you would also kill you, but you know what I'm saying. Interesting how the evolution of fortifications kind of happened around cannons, and I know there's many people watching this who are far more versed in the history of this, so maybe I shouldn't even discuss it, but like the reason that Constantinople was finally able to be taken, for example, was the advent of like gunpowder and cannons and this type of stuff, and then the evolution of how armies fought and siege warfare became a lot more important, and fortifications developed more and more and more until eventually they were obsoleted by cannons is a little bit interesting. But a lot of fortifications like the Star Fort were developments in response to cannons that were effective against cannons, but eventually they just like they couldn't keep up with a lot of the stuff and the maneuverability of armies and this type of stuff, and forts like which were really important for like several hundred years. Most of the course of this game became relatively obsoleted as like kind of the 19th century started rolling in. We see weaponry. Default price is 3. Various weapons such as swords, pikes, and bows make up the core of weaponry of every army. So we do see bows is often in games separated from swords, but we see them kind of combined. Techniques behind their creation and were an art refined through the ages. Despite that, and regardless of how different the era may be, the weaponry will always be a vital instrument to protect one's independence. It'll be interesting to me to see if weaponry is used in bayonets, or if weaponry still gets used, even with like later era armies, just in much smaller quantities, because like a bayonet's kind of like a mini sword. But that seems like a slightly strange abstraction, but we'll see. Also, if you have a ton of weaponry production and the era changes completely obsolete weaponry is good, that's going to be really bad for you, right? Kind of interesting to think how an economy type that is maybe booming eventually goes by the wayside, which would make you want to prefer to import weaponry as a kind of interesting sort of dynamic, perhaps. We see glass. Default price is 2. I was expecting a little bit higher for glass, but okay. Transport cost is a half. It has been valued for centuries as a useful material for art, architecture, or simply crafting vessels for daily use. Eventually, glass-making techniques improved. Glass would become crucial to the scientific field of optics, with glass lenses being used in the fabrication of spectacles, telescopes, and a plethora, we love to see it, of other devices with wide-ranging applications from maritime navigations to the natural sciences. Wow, this dev diary's gone on forever. We have steel, which has a price of 5, and a transport cost of 2, kind of similar to iron, but a little bit more valuable. Steel is widely used for the crafting of weaponry and guns. Various of qualities are used for different weapons. Blunt steel for axes, high-quality steel for swords and knives. As such, steel is also employed as the main metal of forging of equipment and tools. So we will have steel kind of being an essential element for like industrialization. We kind of know that a little bit from Victoria 3, but you can't just have just the iron ore. You have to also turn it into steel in order to get the full value. Because I think iron ore was either 3 or 4 for the default price. And I suppose we will. We need to see have goods get more valuable as they go up the supply chain, right? The output has to 1 unit of steel, if it uses 1 unit of iron as an input, has to have a price that is higher than the iron, right? And for that transmutation to be useful, which we are assuming that it is. Cloth represents the various fabrics and clothing made from wool and linen. Later, cotton imported from India and Americas became a major material for cloth. We have fine cloth, double the price. Fine clothing was traditionally a marker of status for the elites and wealthy classes. Textiles such as damask, muslins, or brocades were marked and replicated throughout the world as a very profitable business in the Middle and Modern Ages. I assume fine cloth is going to have dyes that is an input, and regular cloth might not, or might have significantly less. We see liquor. Price is 2.5. Liquor is an alcoholic beverage produced by the distillation of various types of products of plant origin. Interesting that wine is a good that doesn't require any sort of... Wine is a good that just appears, right? And liquor is a good that requires a specific type of building in order to output. Distillation is done to increase the alcohol by volume. Popular liquors distilled and consumed around the world were gin, rum, whiskey, vodka, tequila, or soju. We have beer. Beer has been a pillar of gastronomy since it was first brewed in the Neolithic. It became a widespread drink in the Middle Ages and was the object of the oldest food quality regulation and use, the Bavarian Reinheitsgebot. Hopefully I got the pronunciation. Slaves! Default price is 3. The slaves have been a trading commodity since antiquity, but demand increased sharply in the 16th century. Slaves offered one of the cheapest sources of labor for European plantations in the Americas. As we've seen kind of discussed in what is now Tinto talk of quite some time ago, they are both a pop and a good, which of course makes a lot of sense. Paper default price is 2. Interesting that we don't see it being lighter. Maybe that's okay. like in terms of trading it is easier. I guess when you have like a ream of paper, it's actually quite heavy. It's necessary for all the types, or lower transport costs is what we mean when we say lighter. For all types of advanced accounting, administration, and diffusion of knowledge. The process of its production was originally devised in China, and then slowly made its way to all corners of the world, far superior to other types of writing materials such as parchment. The large-scale production of paper requires a specialized set of skills and equipment, making it a rare and sought-after commodity. With a default price of 2, and it isn't cheaper to transport, I think they're selling paper a little bit short here, but okay. We have books. The default price is 5. Books have been one of the main, books have been one of the main custodians of human knowledge since writing was invented thousands of years ago. They were usually made of leather, parchment, and other plant fibers. The invention and spread of movable type printing systems in the Middle Ages made books much more widespread and accessible to the population. It will be very interesting to see what the book production methods look like, because when you're using a scribe, the amount of labor required to produce books is incredible. And when you have the printing press, it's incredibly low. And so it'll be interesting to see if that's captured in like a 20-fold increase or decrease, or like you only need 5% of the amount of laborers to produce books. In fact, it's probably even less. I wonder just how aggressive they are with books being so much more efficient once the printing press gets invented, especially on a per laborer basis. You know, it was definitely more expensive to equip someone with a printing press than it would be to equip them with a quill and some ink. But it'll be really interesting to see how that gets handled in game by the buildings that are used to produce books, because that might be the very most jarring example of automation or this type of thing, or mass production within this time period, is the movement of books having to be done one at a time by hand to being done by the printing press. Incidentally, the movement of, or the change of the way the West has done mathematics, going from geometric to algebraic, is in large part because you could not do mass-produced pictures for geometric kind of oriented math that you could do so with algebraic when the printing press came around, and this is a big part is responsible for moving the West towards a type of mathematics that is actually more conducive to calculating various things in like the algebraic computational equations, and so this kind of precipitated the scientific revolution in some ways, the inventing of the printing press, forcing kind of the Western world off of geometric math, or doing calculations geometrically rather than like computationally or algebraically. But we're curious to see that unpacked a little bit more. Jewelry, default price is 5, transport cost is 0.5. It represents a set of regalia or ornaments that are crafted by skilled smiths using jewels and their precious stones. Their value is often associated with high social standing and even royalty. The low transport cost is maybe going to be making it a good that is useful to arbitrage. Or import just so you can produce, just so you can trade it. This is kind of what we're thinking every time we see the low transport cost of leather. So this is going to be, the question is we have the wild game producing both food and we like the wild game good, and it's unclear to me on a lot of those food goods if the secondary good's important, but the secondary good would be an input for labor, right? Other than just food for wild game. One of humanity's earliest discoveries, leather is largely used in the manufacturing of clothing, footwear, and decoration. Its success is largely attributed to the high level of comfort and durability, eventually becoming the choice material for the making of dinner-related furniture. Really? Due to leather being easily to maintain while being resistant to absorbing food odor. Really? I was going to think of it being like important in shoes, but okay. Okay. Tools, default price is 3. The production of tools is the main factor that allowed human society to flourish. From the simple and primitive stone to the most advanced and precise implements developed through the use of metallurgy, they allow for the further creation of equipment and weapons. You know what's interesting, though, is at the very outset, we received news that if you don't have enough goods in the market, Some places just won't get the goods. It won't be the case that you have to buy at a higher price and you'll get a fake good like what happens in Victoria 3. You need to have enough goods. And I wonder, without, pun entirely intended, how much, running a shortage on tools specifically will throw a wrench in your economy, because there's not something I can think of that's an input for more things. And so even though it's got a relatively modest price, it's perhaps the case that you really want to overproduce on tools specifically, to avoid your economy breaking down due to lack of tools. It's interesting to think of other instances in which, kind of the economy collapses because it doesn't have some sort of good specifically that's used in the production of other goods. But tools in particular comes to mind. And maybe this is just like Victoria 3 talking, where it's like an input for everything. But if you have poor market access and you don't get any tools, does that just like shut down your economy? And if it does, that's going to feel really rough. Okay, next up we have is masonry. Default price is 1. Construction techniques come in all shapes and sizes. Yep, the ability to fabricate smaller pieces with a regular size and shape to be used in construction greatly increases not only the efficiency of which buildings can be constructed, but also the durability once built. I forget if we've seen whether or not buildings have multiple ways you can produce them, but if there's multiple ways to produce, like, let's say a castle, and one uses masonry versus one using stone, and overall the masonry one's more efficient but requires that you add masonry, that would be pretty neat and would make sense. But we do see default price is 1. And next up, we see lacquerware. Default price is 5. Lacquerware was developed in China and Japan as far back as the Neolithic period, more than 10,000 years ago, and consists in covering products made of wood or metal with a decorative layer of lacquer, a protective extracted from resin and wax. The lacquer layer can then be further decorated with paintings or carvings or dustings of gold and silver, making it into a luxurious good. All right. And that's the very, very long dev diary. Shout out to you guys who made it to the end. Stay tuned, and next week we'll delve into all the vegetations, topography, and climate, which will be exciting because I think that in addition to all the different goods that you can get, informing strategy and this type of stuff, I do think that vegetation, topography, and climate is also something that's going to inform different sorts of play patterns, which, like, layering these multiple things on top of each other and constructing different strategies based on where you are and what your goods look like and this type of stuff, I think it's one of the things that has me, like, most fascinated with thinking about playing EU5. And so very exciting to kind of think through that a little bit in regards to these goods. We did go through a lot of goods, had a lot of tangential discussions because, there's a lot of tangents to go down when you think about the production of goods. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube algorithm thing. And other than that, have a happy Wednesday.